Normally when I see stuff X'd out through other rival gang members, stuff, it's like you're gonna get one of them. Is that what that means? You're gonna X a police officer out?
Tonight, a volatile foot pursuit caught on camera. You can see police chasing a suspect through a neighborhood in Los Angeles when out of nowhere, this man fires at one of the cops.
Say Saucedo and 7 other men, all members of the same Latino gang, seen in this surveillance video, threw Molotov cocktails into the homes of black families living in the Ramona Gardens housing project.
For this officer, the arrest almost turns deadly while retrieving the suspect's weapon from the roof. The gun accidentally discharges in the policeman's hand.
That's what they do to us. They put us on 24-hour surveillance. This little kid jail. You know what I'm saying? You ain't never been to the Nickerson Gardens. I'm gonna have you up close and personal.
A Sacramento Kings player was one of 2 people arrested after a mob formed in the Nickerson Gardens housing project in Watts. Zach Randolph was arrested on a drug possession charge. Officers were investigating the area of 112th and Zamora Avenue last night when a bunch of people started to gather there. Police called for backup. More patrol units got to the scene. They say the mob destroyed some squad cars and threw objects at officers.
It's actually happening out here in the Imperial Courts area. It all started around 4 in the morning, a little after 4 in the morning. Shots fired, and then when first responders arrived out here, they did find a victim, only described as a 20-year-old male in one of the walkways.
Southbound on Success here. As they cross the street, 3 cars come up on them. As a Jeep, it's a white Jeep, passes them by. 3 suspects come out and start shooting at 2 victims.
The projects, or officially termed housing projects, or simply affordable housing, have been a staple in America's history since the early 1900s. These low-income communities originally were built for the homeless and military housing. When first built, these communities were close-knitted, beautiful areas with families thriving and barely any issues occurring. But as demographics shifted, these communities slowly became breeding grounds for daily gangs, people, and criminal activity. And today, are often considered a last resort for most people through these activities and a lot more other factors. These days, about 90% of projects are some of the most ran down, grimiest, and dangerous areas to reside in. That's why they're often featured in movies, video games, the news, and other media outlets as a stomping grounds for some of the most violent, ghetto, and scariest places to reside in. Projects, they're all around the nation. But in Los Angeles, they're one of the most common sights in the county. And stepping into these communities if you're an enemy, unfamiliar face, or even a cop can cost you your life. Today, we're gonna go over some of the most deadly projects in Los Angeles and addressing why they have such deadly reputations. With that being said, in no particular order, here are the 10 most notorious projects in Los Angeles County. Yeah. All right. Welcome to CALI'S Most Dangerous. Let's get into it. Number 10, Pueblo Del Rio.
During any police chase, officers never know when death may be hiding just around the next corner.
Man, when it comes to these projects, visually, they don't look bad anymore. But damn, nigga, I'd be lying if I said you could just walk in these projects and feel safe. That's because these projects have a lot more going on beneath the surface. The Pueblo Del Rio housing project sits in South Los Angeles, tucked between Vernon Avenue and Slauson, east of Central Avenue. Built in 1941, Pueblo Del Rio was supposed to represent the future. Clean, modernist apartments surrounded by green spaces. Built to house working-class families employed in the nearby factories and war industry plants that powered Los Angeles during World War II. For the first decade, Pueblo Del Rio thrived. The residents were largely black families who migrated from the South, seeking opportunity in LA's booming war economy. At the time, it symbolized hope, offering affordable rent and a sense of community. Kids played in the courtyards, neighbors knew each other by name, and the project, it stood as one of the few places where black workers could secure stable housing in a segregated city. But as the decades wore on, the promise of the Pueblo Del Rio unraveled. By the 1960s and 70s, the industrial jobs that once supported the community had begun to disappear. Factories shut down, white flight gutted nearby neighborhoods, and disinvestment left the project crumbling. What was meant to be a model of affordable housing became a neglected pocket of poverty. Drugs, unemployment, and broken city promises created fertile grounds for gangs. By the late 1970s into the 1980s, Pueblo Del Rio became a stronghold for some of LA's most notorious gangs. Most prominently, factors of the Bloods, including the Pueblo Bishop Bloods and the Oriental Boys Bloods, who claimed the territory as their own. Violence between these Bloods and rival gangs, particularly Crips sets, cemented Pueblo Del Rio's reputation as one of the most dangerous housing projects in California. But also these projects, they have Bloods who have made them feared by not only their enemies, but even cops are cautious when cruising around these areas. All this stems from several shootouts between the Bloods in these projects and the cops, including a widely known situation that made headlines in 2019.
The LAPD releasing video of the April incident that started with a traffic stop. That situation escalating when the driver got out of the car and ran.
On April 20th of 2019, at approximately 9:21 p.m., LAPD officers Chesham and Trujillo were partnered together in patrolling the area in the Pueblo Del Rio housing projects in Los Angeles. Both officers, they were dressed in standard LAPD uniform, and Trujillo was driving a marked police car. And while patrolling, Chesham observed the driver of a silver BMW commit several traffic violations, including speeding and failing to stop at a posted stop sign. The officers, they then followed the BMW eastbound to a narrow street resembling an alley with the cedar block wall running along the north side. And while telling the driver, the BMW driver unexpectedly stopped the car in an alleyway, and right after that, Trujillo activates the car's overhead lights. The BMW driver immediately opened his door and exits the car. Chesham believed he saw a handgun tucked in the BMW driver's pants underneath the shirt. As the officers got out of their car, the BMW driver ran south into the housing development, followed by a pursuit. Chesham broadcast over the police radio that he was in foot pursuit of a man with a gun as he ran after the BMW driver. Trujillo also ran and followed Chesham. The BMW driver, he then ran into a southern section between several buildings, to the east of a playground and a social gathering of many people in a courtyard. The BMW driver, he then circles around the building and ran in the northern direction past other buildings in the housing development, west of the playground. Video surveillance from the housing development, it depicted Pueblo Bishop Blood member Curly Lee Duff near a picnic table when the officers were pursuing the BMW driver in a southern direction. As the BMW driver and the officers circled around the building and ran northbound, Duff moved westbound from the picnic table past the playground. As Chisholm ran northbound past Duff in pursuit of the BMW driver, Duff began running behind Chisholm while holding a handgun on his right side. But in the midst of that, Duff looks back, turns, and runs in the direction towards Trujillo. And as he ran towards Trujillo, he pointed his handgun and fired several shots at him.
Duff ran only a few feet when he abruptly looked back and simultaneously turned toward the second officer. Duff pointed a handgun at the officer and shot at him.
After Duff began firing, Trujillo drew a service weapon and returned fire. Both Trujillo and Duff were struck by gunfire, and Duff collapses on the ground with his handgun near his right hand. Immediately after the shooting, Officer Chesham stopped the pursuit of the BMW driver and returned to Trujillo, who was limping and stated that he had been shot. Shortly thereafter, Trujillo collapsed as he had sustained several gunshot wounds to his body. After the shooting, a large number of bystanders addressed towards Chesham, Trujillo, and the other responding officers.
I'm here, bro, my leg. He shot you?
As the officers wait for backup and first responders, a crowd of angry residents gathered.
Due to officer and public safety concerns, Chesham retrieved and secured the handgun Duff used. The handgun was a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. And due to the series of Trujillo's injuries, responding officers transported Trujillo to a hospital in a police car. Unfortunately, he survived his injuries. Duff also sustained a gunshot wound and was transported to the hospital by an ambulance, and he also survived his injuries. Down the line, he was charged with the attempted murder of a police officer and an unlawful possession of a firearm. This situation, it was just one of many that involves cops in these projects. On top of that, stories of shootouts in broad daylight, LAPD raids, and entire generations growing up inside the circle of poverty and gang warfare became attached to the Pueblo Del Rio housing project's name. Number 9, Nickerson Gardens.
This is the original scene, 114th and Alvaro. The Nickerson Gardens public housing complex is right there on the left. That's those yellow buildings. And then as those officers were responding is when they found out that there is an additional gunshot victim at 112th and Central.
18-year-old boy died. You got a kid? You got a kid, brother? Do you know this feeling?
Lost. Took my baby from me. Lost. And I just can't fathom it. I feel like I'm in a dream.
Bruh, fuck entering these projects. Down to this part are damn near 99% of Watts. If you ain't trying to get shot at, robbed, or worse. Look, the only time you'll see me over there is at Hawkins House of Burger. Is this place birthday? Hell yeah. Bro, them burgers is heaven. But shit, that's where you're gonna end up if you get caught slipping over here, especially if you're in it. That's because every project in this area is considered one of the most notorious in America. But in particular, when people think of Los Angeles housing projects, one name always rises to the top, the Nickerson Gardens. Built in 1955 in the heart of Watts, The Nickerson Gardens were part of a massive post-World War II push to provide affordable housing for the city's working-class families. With 1,066 units spread across 105 buildings, it was and still is the largest public housing development west of the Mississippi River. Like many of LA's projects, Nickerson Gardens began with a promise. It was originally intended to house families who worked stable jobs in nearby factories, rail yards, and shipping industries. The units were modest but modern for their time, and the design centered around a large open space where children can play and families can gather. In the early years, the Nickerson Gardens were seen as an opportunity, an answer to the overcrowded slums of South Los Angeles. But that optimism didn't last. By the late 1960s into the 1970s, Whiteside became a flashpoint for racial tension, poverty, and civil unrest, symbolized most famously by the 1965 Watts riot, which erupted just blocks away from the Nickerson Gardens.
An uneasy calm prevails in what is known as the Watts area of the city. A curfew was put into effect, and the entire section declared off-limits to all but residents. The people who live here are suffering great hardship, with no grocery, drug, or other service stores able to operate.
As factories shut down and jobs disappeared, families in the projects faced deepening poverty, limited educational opportunities, and an increasing sense of abandonment by the city. The Nickerson Gardens, they became a place where generational struggle collide with systematic neglect. It was in this climate that gangs rose to power.
But if you go around here and shoot somebody, the cameras will be all over you. They've been talking about you are a threat. Because they do not want the educated black man to make it in society today.
By the 1970s, Nickerson Gardens had become a stronghold for the Bounty Hunter Bloods, a set that would grow into one of the most infamous and feared gangs in Los Angeles. The Bounty Hunters, they controlled the area with the iron fist, clashing with rival Crips sets across South LA, and turning the Nickerson Gardens into ground zero for some of the city's most violent gang wars. Shootouts, setup, murders, massive drug operations, and police presence became a part of daily life, making the projects synonymous with danger in the eyes of outsiders. By the crack epidemic of the 1980s and early 90s, the Nickerson Gardens were firmly submitted as one of California's most notorious housing projects. The media, they portrayed it as a war zone. LAPD ran countless raids, and entire generations, they grew up in the shadow of both community pride and gang warfare. But to take it a step further, like the Pueblo Del Rio projects, it's been several run-ins with local law enforcement. For example,
police killed my son. A grief-stricken mother points the blame squarely on LAPD officers for the shooting death of her 18-year-old son she identified as Richard Risher Jr. last night in the Nickerson Gardens housing project in Watts.
On July 25th of 2006, at around 11 p.m., officers were patrolling the project when they saw a group of men near 111th Street and Antwerp Street. Officers, they had been paying particular attention to this area because of a deadly dispute between a gang affiliated with the Nickerson Gardens and a rival group associated with the nearby Jordan Down housing projects, the Bounty Hunter Bloods and the Great Street Crips. The feud, which police believe began with the July 15th shooting in Hawthorne, led to a series of back-and-forth shootings that left 3 people dead and 8 people wounded. The officers on patrol, they saw what they believed to be a group of gang members and stopped to investigate. And as they stopped, one man began to run and turned and started shooting at the police officer, who fired back, killing them instantly. One officer was hit in the arm and taken to a hospital for treatment. And the dead man, it was identified by his parents as Richard Risher. The officer said a gun was found in close proximity to his body. And based on an initial investigation, a detective said it appeared that the officers responded to a deadly threat appropriately. Risher's mother, Lisa Simpson, learned about her son's death when her daughter called her with the news late that night. She then called Richard's father, who didn't believe her at first and hung up the phone. But then when she called back, he said he got into his car and sped to the housing projects. Once there, the parents still couldn't get a clear answer about what happened, with each questioning the police account, saying they didn't believe their son had a weapon.
I don't get that. It's an 18-year-old boy died. You got a kid? You got a kid, brother? Do you know this feeling, brothers?
The father says the 18-year-old was with a group of people and could have been running away from the gunfire when he was shot by the police. Trust, when talking about these projects, it's many more cases involving cop shootings, murders, and drive-bys. It's honestly sad to say, but it's damn near a common thing when talking about the Nickerson Gardens. For many Angelinos, the Nickerson Gardens is more than just a housing project. It's a symbol of how post-war optimism turned to systematic failure, how poverty and neglect view one of LA's most notorious gangs, and how a community, despite everything, continues to survive in the face of a reputation written in blood and struggle. Number 8, the Jordan Downs.
We have no way else way to event our frustration out. Because we're already at the bottom. You know, what else can we do? Nothing but violence. I mean, going to jail back and forth. I mean, killing, and also watching brothers get killed. I mean, it can take a toll on your life.
Bro, don't come to the Jordan Downs. It really goes down. For a lot of people in Watts, it is considered the grimiest part of town. In the middle of Watts, stretching over 700 units of 2-story brick buildings, stands the Jordan Downs, one of Los Angeles' most infamous housing projects. But before it gained that reputation, the Jordan Downs had a very different origin story. Originally built in the 1940s, the Jordan Downs, they weren't even meant for long-term housing. It began as a set of temporary barracks for war industry workers during World War II. When the war ended, the Los Angeles Housing Authority took over the site, converting the units into public housing for returning veterans and their families. At first, the Jordan Downs had carried an aura of stability. Veterans came home with the GI Bill. Jobs were plentiful in factories and shipping yards. And the projects, they offered affordable housing at a time when segregation and discriminatory housing practices shut Black families out of most of the neighborhoods. But like his sister projects, the Nickerson Gardens and Imperial Courts, the dream, it quickly soured. By the late 1950s and 60s, the factories and aerospace jobs that sustained the community began to vanish. Poverty deepened, and with city neglect, the Jordan Downs became overcrowded and under-resourced. And just like the Nickerson Gardens, tensions reached a breaking point in 1965 when the Watts riot exploded just blocks away. And the Jordan Downs, they became a staging ground and a symbol of anger simmering across Black Los Angeles.
Dan said to me today that all this would not have happened if the Negroes had been treated differently, and he said, if you treat somebody like a mad dog, he's going to behave like a mad dog. Is that a little too extreme for you, or do you believe that?
Well, I have to go along with that.
By the 1970s and 80s, the Jordan Downs had gained a new reputation, and it was much darker. It was the heart of the Gray Street Crips. The Gray Street Crips turned the projects into their own turf, controlling the area and clashing rival blood sets throughout South Los Angeles. Violence became a grim constant. During the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, the Jordan Downs, they were one of the hardest hit communities. The LAPD, they carried out frequent raids, helicopters circled nightly, and news crews filmed from behind bulletproof vests. Cementing Jordan Downs in the public imagination as one of California's most dangerous places to live.
For us to create an economic base for ourselves and recycle them dollars between us, man, we'd have so much power, man, it's unbelievable. And power is money, man. They don't want to see us with that kind of power, you know what I mean? I mean, just what Dawud said, man, they not giving us no loans or nothing like that, man. When a black man try and get a loan, they take you through different channels and where to as come in and you know, from another country and come in and get one like that, you know what I'm saying? But I've been living here all my life and I can't get none, you know what I'm saying? It ain't that brothers ain't trying to do nothing, but it's the system, man. They take you through so many channels, man, that frustrate a brother or another person, you know what I'm saying, from trying to get a loan, and then, you just say the hell with it, man.
By the 1990s, the Jordan Downs was more than just a housing project. It was a symbol of urban America's failures, and that reputation they continued for years. Matter of fact, from 2000 through 2013, over 25 people were killed inside the development, the territory of the Gray Street Crips. With 2013 having a deadly situation planned out that started right in the heart of the Jordan Downs.
I'm willing to die for the brothers. I'm willing to die with the black thing, you know? Why are you saying that? These are people.
On August 4th of 2013, well-known Gray Street Crip member Marvin Vontaaay was headed to his house near the Jordan Downs housing projects in Watts, California, when shots rang out. Marvin was shot in his arm, and 6 .45 caliber shell casings were found on the street near his house. When questioned by police, Marvin was uncooperative and declined to offer any information regarding the identity of the shooter or shooters. You know what they say, real G's, they move in silence. So of course he wasn't snitching like some of you bitch-ass niggas out there. Fast forward a few weeks later to September 23rd at around 2:30 p.m. Marvin, he was sitting outside his girlfriend's apartment in the Jordan Downs, waiting on her to come out, when her car drove up and one or more of his occupants fired several shots at Marvin. He dodged a few bullets and ducked off, but he suffered a graze wound to his head. Marvin went to the hospital for treatment, but when the officers arrived at the hospital to question him about the incident, he ripped off his monitoring equipment and went home. Witnesses alleged that Marvin was pissed. He was filled with rage. He was ready for war. Cops then alleged that Gray Street Crip members Marvin, Kevin Phillips, and Christopher Ladd went on a shooting spree for revenge. I've spoken on this on my other videos about the bounty hunters and the Gray Street Crips, but to keep it short, the bounty hunter Bloods, who occupied the Nickerson Gardens, and the Gray Street Crips are bloody rivals. and have been at each other's heads for decades now. I say this because it's alleged that the Grape Street Crip members, they put in a lot of work in that area after Marvin was shot. Later that day at around 7:25 p.m., Kevin White, a member of the Bounty Hunter Bloods gang, was in the front yard of his residence at the Nickerson Gardens when a Chevrolet Tahoe pulled up to the curb. Thinking it was an ally, White briefly approached the Tahoe, but after realizing it was an op, he turned and ran back into his yard. But as he ran back, two men got out of the Tahoe and let off multiple fatal shots at White. 4 bullets recovered from White's body and 11 shell cases recovered from the scene were fired by a 9mm handgun. And 2 cases recovered from the scene were fired from a .45 caliber handgun. That night definitely wasn't over for the Grape store, because later at around 7:45 p.m., Marcus Brighter, a member of the rival PJ Watts Crips, was visiting his girlfriend at her apartment in the Imperial Courts housing projects. When the night was over, Brighter walked out of his girlfriend's apartment and several gunshots rang out. That's when his girlfriend looked out the window and saw 3 men get into a minivan. 2 of the men entered the minivan through the sliding door on the rear passenger side, while the others got into the front passenger seat, saying she saw one of the men put a gun into his waistband, and the minivan started to drive off. But just as it was pulling off, one of the men in the car screamed, "Fuck you, nigga, it's great." The girlfriend then ran outside and found Brighter, who had been shot 6 times with a gunshot wound to his head being a fatal shot. The 4 bullets recovered from his body and the 4 cases recovered from the scene of the crime were fired by a 9mm handgun, and 4 additional cases from the scene were fired by a .45 caliber handgun. Later that night, LAPD was patrolling the area when they stopped and questioned some of the men standing in front of a minivan about a mile away from the Jordan Downs housing projects. The cops searched the minivan and a loaded .45 caliber handgun were found in the minivan's driver's seat. It was subsequently determined that the .45 caliber handgun matched the .45 caliber casings recovered from the scenes of White's and Brighter's shooting. And ultimately, all 3 of the Grape Street Crip members were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus a 25-year enhancement for the gun charge. Because of situations like these and others, the Jordan Downs, they've been a subject to rap lyrics, police reports, and countless documentaries on gangs in Los Angeles. Today, the Jordan Downs, they're undergoing a massive redevelopment, with the old-style buildings being torn down and replaced by modern apartments and retail spaces. City leaders call it a rebirth, but for many longtime residents, the shout-out to the Jordan Downs past, its role as a credit of both community pride and notorious gang warfare remains impossible to erase. Number 7, Imperial Courts.
It's actually happening out here in the Imperial Courts area. That all started around 4 in the morning, a little after 4 in the morning. Shots fired, and then when first responders arrived out here, they did find a victim, only described as a 20-year-old male in one of the walkways.
Okay, this area is one you definitely shouldn't be found in if you're not local. There ain't no food places, no stores. Man, it ain't shit over there but trouble. And that's exactly what the gangs are gonna think you over there looking for if you are op or if you don't look familiar. In the landscape of South Los Angeles, Imperial Courts stands as one of the most storied and feared housing projects in California. Built in 1944, Imperial Courts was a part of a wartime housing boom, designed to shelter workers employed to the nearby factories and shipyards that empowered America's World War II effort. Like Jordan Downs and the Pueblo Del Rio, it was seen as progress, a clean, modernist development where working-class families, many of them black migrants from the South, could afford a place to live while tasting the promise of Los Angeles. The location, however, planted the seeds of the project's struggles. Imperial Courts sits in Watts, one of the most segregated and economically challenged neighborhoods in Los Angeles. When the war ended and industry jobs began to dry up, residents found themselves trapped in a cycle of poverty, with limited access to education, healthcare, or upward mobility. By the 1950s and 60s, what was once built a hopeful housing development had become overcrowded, underfunded, and neglected by the city. On top of that, just like its sister project, Imperial Courts' history became forever linked with the 1965 riots, which erupted just like the others, just blocks away from the projects. And this came after decades of police harassment, poverty, and frustration boiled over. The projects became both a staging ground and a symbol of rebellion. From that point on, the Imperial Courts' reputation shifted from a struggling housing development to one of the flashpoints of racial unrest in America. In the years that followed, Imperial Courts became the stronghold of the PJ Watts Crips, a gang that rose to prominence in the 1970s and 80s. The PJ Watts Crips, they clashed with rival blood sets across South Los Angeles, as well as other Crip factions, embroiling the projects in constant violence. And when the crack epidemic hit in the 1980s, the Imperial Courts, they turned into one of the epicenters of drug trafficking and turf wars. shootouts, LAPD raids, and immediate coverage of the chaos branded the Imperial Courts as one of the most dangerous addresses in the state. Today, the Imperial Courts still carry the weight of that history. While city officials, they tried to revitalize the area, its legacy as one of California's most notorious housing projects lived on. Its story, it mirrors the rise and fall of public housing projects in Los Angeles. Born out of wartime necessity, abandoned to poverty and neglect, and transformed into a battleground that shaped gang culture for generations.
October the 7th, 5:15 p.m., LAPD officers were on patrol near the Imperial Court housing projects when they encountered a group of young African-American males. When one of the black males started to run away from the LAPD officers for unknown reasons, a chase ensued inside the Imperial Court housing projects, where LAPD officers alleged that the black male pointed a gun at one of the officers during the chase. The officers opened fire, killing the black male.
He was stationary just like this.
Okay. And you saying they walked up, and at that time, what happened?
The officer said, "You gonna point a gun at me, you gonna point a gun at me," and shot him 3 times.
Number 6, San Fernando Gardens.
Those gang officers attempting to pull over a black BMW, and suddenly the car came to a stop at Carl and Lehigh in the San Fernando Gardens housing projects. Police ran right behind him, and inside the housing project, somewhere near Building 74, there was a confrontation between this armed suspect and police officers, and one of those officers shot him.
Tucked away in the northeast corner of the San Fernando Valley sits the San Fernando Gardens, a housing project that on the surface looks far removed from the iconic Watts projects in South Los Angeles. But its story runs parallel, and its reputation as one of California's most notorious housing projects has been carved over decades of poverty, neglect, and gang warfare. The San Fernando Gardens were built in 1944, once again during World War II, as a part of Los Angeles' broader public housing expansion. Like the Pueblo Del Rio and the Jordan Downs, it was originally intended for families working in the wartime industry, especially those employed with the Valley's aircraft plants and defense factories. By the 1950s, the San Fernando Valley was marketed as the American dream, suburban homes or white picket fences. But that dream, it didn't extend to the San Fernando Gardens. Residents, largely Mexican and black families, were boxed in by segregation, redlining, and economic inequality. While other parts of the valley boomed, Pacoima became an industrial pocket with heavy pollution, poverty, and underfunded schools. San Fernando Gardens, once envisioned as stable worker housing, was quickly branded a pocket of struggle. The 1970s and 80s marked a turning point. As factories closed and jobs dried up, the community faced rising unemployment and poverty. And in this vacuum, gangs, they emerged as a force of both identity and survival. And like all these housing projects so far, the arrival of the crack epidemic in the 1980s only deepened the crisis. Massive drug operations, set up murders, robberies, and constant LAPD sweeps turned the San Fernando Gardens into a hotspot for violence. And by the 1990s, its reputation rivaled that of the Nickerson Gardens or the Jordan Downs, though with its own valley identity. Outsiders, they knew Pacoima as gang country, and the San Fernando Gardens as its heart. And to this day, there's been multiple examples of the violence playing out in these housing projects. For example,
across Los Angeles, at least 8 people shot at several different crime scenes. We're learning one of the victims was a teenage boy. He was murdered at an apartment complex in Pacoima. The LAPD detained 2 potential suspects for questioning.
On September 20th of 2009, 16-year-old Project Boy member Santa Ana lived in the San Fernando Gardens housing project, which was in the territory of the Project Boys. Santa Ana and fellow Project Boys member Javier Zamora were on approach of Rosemary Hurtado's apartment when Justin Carell joined them. Carell, he wasn't a gang member and had just moved into the San Fernando Gardens housing projects. Initially, the group were just hanging out, talking, and smoking. But about 5 minutes after Carell arrived, known Terabella gang members Juan Juarez, Juan Tambasas, and Victor Balbino approached carrying firearms. And once close enough, Balbino asked the trio where they were from. What Santa Ana knew was a gang parlance, asked him which gang they were from. Carell, he tried to say he wasn't from a gang, but in the midst of that, one of the aggressors said they were from Terabella and started making threats towards a Project Boys member. And after the conversations escalated into arguments, Juarez told a group of young children playing nearby, including Carell's brother, to leave. And when the kids walked away, the Terabella members began letting off multiple shots. Zamora was shot 7 times, 3 of which were fatal. Carell was hit 4 times, 2 of those bullets were fatal. Santa Ana, he was shot 5 times, and although he survived, he acted like he was dead. After the Terabella members ran towards the direction they came from, Santa Ana saw his friends were dead, so he tried to walk away to a nearby fire station, but he collapsed on the way. Her tutor heard the gunshots and emerged from her apartment to investigate. And when she walked out, she saw Santa Ana and the other 2 victims laid out. And as she checked on her children, Santa Ana got up and walked away. When she found him heading towards the police station, he repeatedly told her, "Terabella shot me. Terabella did it." Shortly after the shooting, several LAPD officers arrived at the scene. One officer approached Santa Ana and said to him, "You're gonna die. Who shot you? What happened?" And he responded, "Blackie from Terabella shot me." And he told another officer that Blackie had tattoos of a 1 and a 3 on his forearm. On top of that, at the hospital, Santa Ana was shown a series of photographs and identified all 3 Terabella members as the shooters. And in the end, due to witness and gang member statements, police interviews, and surveillance evidence, Juan Juarez, Juan Tambashes, and Victor Balbino were convicted of the murder of Javier Zamora and Justin Curran, and each were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 15 years to life in state prison. This was only one of the many crazy situations that played in the San Fernando housing project. Yet, like every project in Los Angeles, San Fernando Gardens is more than just the violence that defined it in the headline. For residents, it's also a place of resilience where families raise children, celebrate culture, and hold on to pride in their community despite systematic neglect. But the dual legacy remains. To many in California, San Fernando Gardens is both a home and a symbol of how public housing, left abandoned by the city, became fertile ground for some of the state's most notorious gang history. Number 5, Ramona Gardens.
A barbaric plan to attack and intimidate African-American residents of the Ramona Gardens housing complex in East Los Angeles. Now, this complex is about 95% Hispanic and about 3% African-American. First, this group started with threats and then they moved on to firebombs. And Elaine, they say this was a very sophisticated plot. They purchased disguises, gloves, bomb-making materials, and then they divided themselves into 2 teams and everybody had a very specific task. Right, many of the residents that were targeted, children were home, many of them were minors. In fact, Elaine, one woman, she was sitting with her baby on the couch in the living room right before the firebomb was thrown into her house. Now, other families who weren't specifically firebombed, they reported that mixed-race children were verbally threatened by members of this gang, so it's clear that children were certainly not spared from this intimidation.
On the east side of Los Angeles, tucked into Boyle Heights near the intersection of Soto Street and the 10 freeway, stands Ramona Gardens. But in 1941, under the New Deal's Public Works Administration, Ramona Gardens was part of the city's first major wave of federally funded housing developments, designed to provide safe, affordable housing for city working class families in a city that was rapidly industrializing. The early years, they carried promise. The development was clean, modern, and affordable. Families, mostly Mexican-American and immigrant households, moved in. Many of them working factory jobs in East LA, our nearby industrial zone. Ramona Gardens, like Pueblo Del Rio and the Jordan Downs, was envisioned as a model community, complete with playgrounds and communal courtyards. But within a generation, that vision began to unravel. The decline of factory jobs in the 1950s and 60s hit Boyle Heights hard, leaving many residents trapped in poverty. Coupled with overcrowding, underfunded schools, and discriminatory housing practices that block upward mobility, Ramona Gardens, they began to suffer the same fate as the other projects across the city. What had built a symbol of progress was now marked by neglect. And once again, it was in this environment that gangs took place. By the 1940s, Big Hazard, one of Los Angeles' oldest and most infamous gangs, had claimed Ramona Gardens as his home turf. Big Hazard, it became synonymous with these projects, embedding itself into the identity of the community. Through the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s, Ramona Gardens was notorious for gang warfare. Rivalries with nearby East Side sets, violent clashes with Crips and Bloods outside their territory, and a deep entanglement with the drug trade. Yet, beneath the headlines, Ramona Gardens remained a neighborhood where families raised generations, where morals reflected Chicano pride, and where resilience defined daily life. Residents often describe the contradiction. Ramona Gardens was both a home and a battlefield, a place where community spirit lived alongside the fear of violence. Until today, this statement still stands, thanks to a prominent gang inside these projects. And they've had numerous violent situations playing out, especially in 2009.
Investigators believe they've been operating in the Ramona Gardens area and have ties to the Mexican mafia.
We saw a number of men and women brought in handcuffs and escorted into a holding area. They say about 800 law enforcement personnel from a long list of agencies were involved, including the LAPD, Sheriff's Office, ATF, FBI, IRS, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. That office says that a federal racketeering indictment has been obtained against the gang and that it alleges various violations, including drug trafficking and murder.
We're targeting the worst offenders, the most violent offenders, and they do have direct ties to the Mexican mafia. We're talking about distribution of narcotics, we're talking about robberies, we're talking about a number of different things to be named in the indictments.
Ramona Gardens is a housing project in Los Angeles County dominated by the Big Hazard Street gang. Due to the gang activity in this project being out of control, Ramona Gardens was covered by a gang injunction and assigned its own police gang unit. On the evening of January 24th of 2009, at around 11:45 p.m., LAPD officer Jose Vasquez, a member of the Ramona Gardens gang unit, was on foot patrol with his partner, Officer Matthew Inslee. During the patrol, Vasquez saw two Hispanic men standing near her apartment unit. Vasquez, he recognized one of the men as Gilbert Garcia, a member of the Big Hazard gang. The other man, later identified as Big Hazard member Oscar Velasquez, was wearing a jacket. Vasquez, he knew Garcia had been served with a gang injunction. He wasn't supposed to be associated with other gang members or be inside Ramona Gardens. So he walked towards the two men, intended to detain Garcia to investigate a probable gang injunction. But as Vasquez approached, Garcia and Velasquez ran away around a nearby building. Based on their experience, the officers suspected that the two suspects were using a staircase located nearby that led to a park. So the two officers headed towards the staircase, going the other way around the building. As the officers approached the building near the staircase, Vasquez went to one corner of the building and took cover while Inslee went to the opposite corner. They then saw the two gang members arrive at the scene. Velasquez continued to walk out of the apartment until he noticed the cops. And feeling surrounded, he produced a shotgun and fired one shot at Inslee. Inslee returned fire shooting twice, but he didn't hit anything. And Vasquez unholstered his weapon, but he didn't fire. Velasquez then ran away, but Garcia remained and was detained by Inslee. And while Garcia was being taken into custody, Vasquez chased after Velasquez. And while in pursuit, he saw Velasquez throw the shotgun next to vehicles parked in front of a building. He also saw Velasquez try to get into an apartment unit, knocking on a door and jingling a doorknob. That's when Vasquez approached Velasquez and ordered him to put his hands up. But he responded by turning around and pulling a handgun from his waistband. And so in fear of his life, Vasquez put out his weapon and fired 4 times at Velasquez, who fell to the ground, dropping a handgun, followed by 3 women coming out of the apartment and yelling at Vasquez not to shoot or kill Velasquez. But while doing so, Velasquez got up and yelled, "Shoot me, motherfucker! Finish me off! Shoot me!" But Vasquez didn't fire. Following that interaction, Velasquez ran away, with Vasquez in pursuit. And as he ran, he took off his jacket and dropped it. Shortly thereafter, Vasquez lost sight of Velasquez. But over the police broadcast, he heard a police officer say that he had Velasquez in custody. Ultimately, Velasquez was found guilty of attempted murder of 2 peace officers and was sentenced to state prison for 74 years and 8 months. Thankfully, nobody was killed in this situation, but it does give a big example of the type of violence that takes place in these projects. Today, while redevelopment projects and community programs have tried to transform the area, the legacy of Ramona Gardens as one of California's most notorious projects still lingers. Its history, spanning from the New Deal optimism to decades of poverty, gang warfare, and survival, mirrors the broader story of Los Angeles public housing. Built with hope, abandoned by the system, and forever marked by the struggles that follow. Number 4, Vista Gardens.
The suspect is still on the loose, and police are trying to pinpoint a motive. The landlord here was mugged a couple of months ago, this time hit over the head with a frying pan and then shot.
Bruh, if you've seen how gentrified the area of Venice and Culver City has become, I guarantee you wouldn't believe it was a housing project over here. It's fucking nice over there. But take a couple wrong turns off of Culver Boulevard, and you'll see one of the most infamous projects of them all. On the west side of Los Angeles, just off of the 405 freeway in Delray, sits the Vista Gardens, a housing project that, despite its location from South Central or Watts, became one of the most notorious projects in California. Built in 1954, Vista Gardens was a part of Los Angeles' post-war push to expand public housing. With nearly 600 units, It was designed to provide affordable apartments for working class families, many of them Latino immigrants and African Americans, who were shut out of the rapidly developing West Side housing market due to segregation and discriminatory practices. Like many projects of the era, it was imagined as a solution to urban poverty. Clusters of two-story buildings with green courtyards, built with the idea of fostering a strong community. And in many years, Vista Gardens, they did offer stability. Residents worked nearby jobs in construction, factories, and the service industry. Families raised children there, and for a time, the projects, they represented opportunity. But by the 1960s and 70s, Los Angeles' industrial backbone began to collapse. And a wave of disinvestment that hit South Central also reached Mar Vista. Poverty deepened, schools suffered, and the project became increasingly isolated from the wealthier neighborhoods surrounding it. It was during this period that gangs took hold. And by the 1980s, once again with the crack epidemic rapid in Los Angeles, Mar Vista Gardens' reputation was cemented. Violence, it became routine, with drive-bys, shootouts, police raids, and constant tension between Venice 13 and rival gangs. Despite being smaller than Watt's massive housing developments, Mar Vista, they carried an oversized reputation. News crews and LAPD, they painted it as a pocket of war zone-style violence on the otherwise affluent West Side, solidifying its place among California's most notorious projects. And just like the before mentioned, there's always a violent situation playing out in these projects. For example, on February 14th of 2015, Bernadette Ingram hosted a Valentine's Day gathering at her apartment in the Mar Vista Gardens housing project. The guests included Bernadette's boyfriend, Jesse Drumgo, her brother, Daryl Ingram, Bernadette's sister, Teresa Ingram, Teresa's boyfriend, Calvin Johnson, and Teresa's son, Randy Willard. Most of the guests, including Johnson, enjoyed the day eating and drinking. And as the evening progressed, the drinks flowed, the music got louder, and the group just was enjoying themselves. But the music from Bernadette's apartment annoyed her next door neighbor, Angelica Accorda. Accorda, she banged on the wall to signal Bernadette and her guests to turn the music down. And some of Bernadette's guests heard the banging on the wall and turned the volume of the music down. But Accorda didn't notice any change in the volume of the music. Unable to sleep, she texted her brother Joe Coronado to, quote, "shut these niggers up." Coronado was a member of the Culver City Boys, a criminal street gang in the Mar Vista Gardens. He was sleeping at his girlfriend's apartment when he received a text message from his sister at 11 p.m. So he left the apartment to help her. When he walked out the front door, his ex-wife, who lived across the street, told him to be careful because she heard gunshots earlier that day. So Coronado, he retrieved his 9mm semi-automatic firearm from his car and went to Bernadette's apartment. When he arrived, he put his face at the Bernadette's screen door and said in a loud voice, "Excuse me, can you guys put the music down? My people are trying to sleep." But according to several guests, Coronado banged on the screen door and appeared aggressive. Drumgo, he wanted to defuse the situation, so he walked outside to talk to Coronado about why he was disturbing his gathering. In the midst of that, Bernadette's guests, they were upset by the way Coronado had disrupted their party. Bernadette was also angry and wanted to go outside to talk to him. But Teresa held Bernadette to keep her from leaving the apartment. But Bernadette broke free and ran outside to yell at Coronado. When Johnson said he would follow Bernadette, Teresa tried unsuccessfully to keep him inside. So Teresa and her son Willard, they went outside to bring Johnson back into the apartment. But Johnson, he was already too angry to be controlled. Meanwhile, Coronado and Drumgo had finished talking, and Coronado, he had started to walk away. When he turned back around, when Johnson came towards him and said, "Fuck what you talking about?" So Coronado responded, "Fuck what I'm talking about?" And Johnson repeated, "Fuck what you talking about?" Coronado, who testified at trial, stated that he turned his back, but looking over his shoulder, saw Drumgo giving Johnson a pistol. So Coronado pulled his gun out of his waistband and spun around. Bernadette and Drumgo, realizing the immediate danger, began running back into the apartment. In referring to Johnson, Teresa said, "Please don't shoot him." And she heard Johnson say, "Oh shit." And as Johnson turned back to the apartment, Coronado shot him 4 times. In his back, the back of his left shoulder, the back of his left arm, and his thigh, with the wounds proving to be fatal. Johnson fell to the sidewalk and Teresa dropped beside him. Willard saw Coronado point his gun at Teresa and Willard yelled, "You better not shoot my mom, motherfucker." So Coronado turned to Willard and shot him in the foot. Coronado then leaves the scene and throws his gun into a creek before he walked back to his car and returned to his girlfriend's apartment. When his girlfriend asked him about the gunshots he heard, he said, "I have no idea what happened." And following the shooting, he called his sister several times and sent her a text message telling her to delete their earlier message exchange and to erase her phone. The next morning, Coronado left Mar Vista to stay with family members, first in Cuddy and then in Banning, where he stayed for a few weeks until the police arrested him. And after a lengthy trial, Coronado was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. This case is just another example of how deadly these projects have been to the locals in the recent decade. Whether it's a cop shooting, gang violence, or local violence, these run-ins, they're common when talking about these areas. Yet, like all projects, Mar Vista has always been more than its reputation. Generations of families have called it home, and murals across its walls testify to both Chicano pride and the pain of loss. For residents, it's a place of resilience where community bonds run deep, even in the shadow of hardship. Number 3, Gonzag Village, formerly known as Hacienda Village. In the shadows of the Los Angeles River, just north of Watts, sits Gonzag Village, a housing project with deep roots to the city's history and a reputation that grew into one of the most feared and infamous in California. Originally built in 1942, Gonzag Village, it began its life under a different name, Hacienda Village. It was one of the earliest federally funded housing developments in Los Angeles. Constructed during World War II to house families of war industry workers. Like other projects of the era, its design was modest. Clusters of low-rising buildings with courtyards and walkways, meant to provide affordable housing in a time of massive migration into Los Angeles. In the early years, Hacienda Village provided stability. Many of the first residents were African-American families who had just came west as a part of the Second Great Migration, drawn by factory jobs in shipyards, railroads, and aerospace. It was one of the few places in a segregated city where Black families could secure affordable housing. For a time, the project carried a sense of community too, but by the 1960s, the same forces that crippled other projects, factory closures, job loss, overcrowded, and systematic neglect hit these projects hard. Poverty deepened, services disappeared, and tensions with LAPD escalated. And in the decades that followed, the project's identity shifted dramatically. By the 1970s and 1980s, Hacienda Village had become a blood stronghold, claimed by the Hacienda Village Bloods, one of the most infamous sets in Los Angeles. The gang's influence spread far beyond the walls of the projects too, and violent robberies would surround the Crips sets locked the area into a cycle of shootings, drug trade, and retaliation. And its reputation, it only grew darker in the 1990s. For many Angelenos, the name Hacienda Village was synonymous with danger, a project where police went heavy. Shootouts, they are a part of daily life, and where families struggled to raise children amid constant chaos. For years, this chaos and violence was aimed at enemy gangs. But after 2017, a long relationship with two gangs that resided in these projects led to a lot of deadly situations in this area. For example, the Village Boys, a Latino gang, and the Hacienda Bloods, an African-American gang, were active in an area of Gonzag Village. The border between the two gangs' territory is 106th Street, with Hacienda Village Bloods territory to the north and the Village Boys territory to the south. The Village Boys and the Hacienda Bloods at a time had a good relationship, but towards the beginning of 2007, that relationship deteriorated, and there's been violence between these two gangs ever since. Raul Garibay was a Village Boys gang member with the moniker Lil Bugsy. Pedro Sabino was not a Village Boy member, but his brother known as Blackie was. Samuel Navarrete and Blackie were close friends, and Samuel, also known as Fresh, was associated with the Village Boys through Blackie, but he wasn't a member. And on the other end, Hacienda Blood member Alonzo Devin Milson was known as Lil Tanker Yang. And Robbie Wilson, known as Chops, was also a member of the Hacienda Blood. I couldn't pinpoint the start of this tension, but I know a big step in this war that occurred on January 13th of 2007. Samuel was driving through the neighborhood when a man threw a rock at his car. He then gets out of his car and asked the man why he did it. And the man responded that he was from Hacienda Village Bloods and challenged him to a fight. But this was just the beginning. January 13th of 2017, at around 8 p.m., Georgina Arizia, who lived in the Hacienda Village by 106th Street and 5th Avenue, was outside her home and observed a group of men in Miguel Alemans, also known as Fatty's yard. Alman, he was a member of the Village Boys. Although Georgina didn't recognize any of the other men inside the yard, she thought they were probably members of the Village Boys. And while outside, she saw Robertson in the street by Alman's yard. Robertson, he was wearing a brown outfit, including a brown hoodie. In addition though, Georgina also saw Milson across the street. He was wearing a red hoodie. She had seen Robertson and Milson in the neighborhood several times before, so she didn't think anything of it. Meanwhile, Melson and another man, who Georgina had never seen before, were watching Robertson arguing with Alvin. The other man was skinny and hunchback, wearing a black hoodie. But after watching the argument for a few minutes, Georgina went back inside. On the other side of the gun, Navarrete picked up Sabino at around 8 p.m. Sabino sat in the front passenger seat of the car, and they drove to 106th Street by 5th Avenue and Park. They remained there because Navarrete was waiting for a friend to join him. And while waiting, at around 8:30 p.m., two men in hoodies approached the car. The shorter man was wearing a black hoodie and a black beanie and was carrying a handgun. Sabino identified the gun he saw as probably a Glock. And noticing the gun, Sabino told Navarrete that the man had a gun and that they should leave. But he responds that he wanted to chill and see what the man wanted. That's when a shorter man knocked on the driver's side door, and Navarrete opened the door. The man asked Navarrete where he was from, and he responds that he was fresh from the Village Boys. The man then asked who was in the car, and Garibe responded, "It's me, Lil Bugsby." And a couple seconds after that, the shorter man began shooting into the car. Sabino ducked down so he couldn't see where the man was aiming. But when he was able to get a sight, he saw the man aim into the back seat and pull the trigger 4 times. However, the gun just clicked because it was out of ammunition. Georgina heard about 15 gunshots fired in rapid succession. And after the shooting stopped, she ran outside to check on her son. She testified that she saw Robertson, Melson, and a skinny hunchback man standing in front. Robertson was pointing a gun and he fired 2 shots. Melson, who was still wearing a red hoodie, was running away from the car towards a housing project. As a result of this shooting, Navarrete died from a gunshot wound to the left torso. He was also shot in both arms and his right thigh. None of the men were caught that night, but during the investigation, the police learned that Robertson was murdered in Louisiana a few months after the shooting. And ultimately, Nelson was sentenced to 60 years to life for the murder. In 2000, the project was renamed Gonzag Village after civilian activist Irvin Gonzag Sr. in an effort to shed his violent image to reclaim his legacy as a community space. Despite the name change though, the reputation has lingered. Gonzag Village remained etched in California's gang history as one of the state's most notorious housing projects. A place born by the wartime optimism, shaped by decades of poverty, neglect, and immortalized by the rise of one of Los Angeles' most feared blood gangs. Number 2, Avalon Gardens.
Avalon Gardens is the hangout of a Crip gang.
What you guys doing, spraying the wall again? What gang are you with, man?
On gangbangers.
Hey, come on, cut the stuff.
On gang.
If I dropped you off in Slob territory, then what are you gonna tell me then?
Then I'm just gonna tell you don't drop me off over there because I got on blue and they don't like me.
Normally when I see stuff X'd out through other rival gang members, stuff, it's like you're gonna get one of them. Is that what that means? You're gonna X a police officer out?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, you know what it means.
In South Los Angeles, just east of Avalon Boulevard, sits Avalon Gardens, a housing project that was smaller than Watts, sprawling complexes carved out its own notorious reputation in California's gang history. Avalon Gardens was built in 1941, during the first major wave of federally funded housing projects in Los Angeles. Like Pueblo Del Rio and Ramona Gardens, it was part of the New Deal era plan to provide affordable homes for working class families, particularly those employed in the booming wartime industry that fueled LA's growth. The layout, it followed the typical model of time. 2-story garden-style apartments arranged around open courtyards with the intention of fostering a close-knit, stable community. And in its early years, the Avalon Gardens, they largely fulfilled this vision. Families, many of them African-American, arrived from the South during the Great Migration. They moved in seeking opportunity and affordable living. And for a time, these projects, they represented a step up, a chance to escape overcrowded slums and discriminatory private housing market. But as Los Angeles changed, Avalon Gardens began to suffer the same fate as nearly every other housing projects in the city. By the 1950s and 60s, as industry shut down and white flight reshaped the city's demographics, Avalon Gardens became increasingly marginalized. Poverty deepened, city services dwindled, and crime, it crept in. By the 1970s, Avalon Gardens became a stronghold for the Avalon Garden Crips, one of the most infamous Crip sets in Los Angeles. The gang turned the projects into its base, controlling the area and engaging in violent rivalries with blood sets and other Crip factions across South Los Angeles. And as the gang grew in reputation, Avalon Gardens' name became inseparable from the image as a breeding ground for violence. Though smaller than the Nickerson Gardens or the Jordan Downs, the Avalon Gardens' reputation was outsized. Its name carried weight on the streets, and the gang born there left a mark far beyond the project itself. And by the 1990s, the Avalon Gardens, they were firmly cemented in the public's imagination as one of California's most notorious housing projects, a place where poverty and systematic neglect had collided with the rise of one of the city's most deadliest gangs. Yet, for residents, Avalon Garden was still home, where families raised children, built bonds, and survived, despite the violence around them. And an unfortunate theme of this video is that violence is a common occurrence in these projects. For example, on August 19th of 2012, at around midnight, 87 gangster Crip members Cornelius Tyson was at home when he received a call from Warren Howard. Howard, he told Tyson that an Avalon Garden Crip member had called him with a taunt, saying, "Come out and play." This phrase means the Avalon Gardens Crips challenged the 87 gangster Crips to a violent altercation. And following this conversation, Howard threatened Tyson that their fellow A7 gangster Crip members would discipline him with physical violence if he didn't come outside. So Tyson, he later left his house with a .38 caliber revolver. Tyson, Howard, Lamar Richardson, and Trayvon Weiss met near the Avalon Gardens housing development. Howard carried a 9mm semi-automatic weapon, and Richardson carried a revolver. The four gang members discussed the plan to walk into the Avalon Gardens and just start shooting. That's when Weiss said, "Let's do this." And, "Are we ready to go?" And Richardson responded, "I'm ready, cuz." After that, the four gang members went inside the Avalon Garden housing projects. While Weiss went into an alley and Tyson waited across the street, Howard and Richardson entered the Avalon Garden. And upon arrival, Howard yelled, "AK, cuz, this Tiny Bone, A7 Gangster Crips, AK." With AK standing for Avalon Killer. Howard and Richardson, they then continued to walk around and eventually saw DB and his friend. And without any words, Howard and Richardson began shooting at him. And as DP ran towards his apartment, Howard and Richardson chased after him, letting off multiple shots, killing him instantly. And when the shooting stopped, Howard and Richardson walked back to the exit. Here's the thing though, Howard accidentally shot Richardson in the leg and then assisted the limping Richardson by supporting him on Howard's shoulder, followed by Wise driving him to the hospital. When Witness Jay heard the gunshots, she was inside her apartment in her bedroom, which she shared with her boyfriend and murder victim DB. She saw Howard running towards the apartment while shooting a gun, and Richardson crouched near some cars near her apartment. And in response to the shooting, she ran outside looking for DB. Once outside, DB pushed her back into the apartment and said, "They got me. They got me." J.A. asked whether the shooters had said anything, and DB responded, "Nope. They just start shooting," followed by him collapsing. She then observed Howard running towards Richardson and heard him say, "Come on, let's go. We got him." She subsequently saw Howard helping Richardson run towards the exit. Before the shooting, Witness Inmate had seen DB outside the apartment with about 10 other Avalon Garden Crip members. When the shooting began, Inmate was inside the apartment that he shared with J.A. and DB, saying he heard shots from two different guns. He saw DB run into the apartment and then watched Howard run up to the front door and shoot into the apartment at DB. And then he heard DB say, "Baby, they got me, they got me." Meanwhile, 10-year-old AV was in the same apartment when he heard gunshots. He walked into the kitchen to get a glass of milk before bed and was returning down the hallway to his bedroom. He then saw DB run into the apartment towards DB and J.A.'s bedroom. He also observed Howard run into the apartment after DB, fire his gun several times, and hide behind a wall. With that being said, AV was in the hallway when Howard fired a shot and hit the child's side. Officer Murillo responded to a 911 call made at 12:48 a.m. on August 19th of 2012 regarding a shooting at the Avalon Gardens housing development. And while inspecting the crime scene, he learned that someone at a hospital was seeking medical treatment for a gunshot wound and identified himself as Frank Harris. Officer Murillo, however, he knew that Harris was a member of the A7 Gangster Crip and he was serving a life sentence for murdering an Avalon Garden Crip member. He then went to the hospital to investigate, where he found Richardson. And during their investigation, the police found a trail of blood inside the apartment, and DNA analysis matched the blood to Richardson. The officers also found evidence of gunshots, both inside and outside the apartment. Based on the evidence at trial, an expert on firearms concluded that the cartridge cases, bullet jacket, and the fired bullets came from the same gun. On top of that, video surveillance footage showed Tyson, Howard, Richardson, and Wise near the Avalon Garden housing development, with both Howard and Richardson entering the housing projects. And lastly, Howard's girlfriend testified that she had dropped Howard off about a block from the same intersection where he and the other three gang members met before going into the Avalon Gardens housing development, with Howard telling her that he had a ride home, with her saying she didn't see him until the next morning. And after the police arrested Howard, he told his girlfriend to get rid of his clothing, to delete his Facebook accounts, and to be his alibi. He also asked her whether she had found a gun. In the end, the trial court sentenced Richardson to 25 years to life for 1 count of first-degree murder. And in light of a prior strike, the court doubled the term to 50 years to life in prison. Today, Avalon Gardens, they stand as both a reminder and a warning. Built with optimism and a new deal, left to deteriorate by decades of disinvestment, and remembered as a cradle of the Avalon gangster Crips, whose name put this modest housing project on the map of Los Angeles gang history. Number 1, Estrada Courts.
I think we've covered every single step in these sidewalks since we were little kids, you know?
It was rough, but you know what I mean, like my friend said, you know what I mean, we wouldn't change it for nothing, you know?
This is our stomping ground.
Yeah, right here, pretty much.
This is the pride of our youth.
Born and raised here, you know.
We'll always come back here.
In the heart of Boyle Heights, in the intersection of East 1st Street and Arena Avenue, lies the Estrada Courts, a housing project whose colorful murals today disguise a history of struggle, poverty, and gang violence that earned it a notorious reputation in California. Like most of these projects, Estrada Courts was built in 1942 as a part of Los Angeles' New Deal era public housing programs. The project was designed to provide affordable housing for working-class Mexican-American families who were largely excluded from the private housing market due to discriminatory practices. With low-rise, 2-story apartments arranged around courtyards, the design aimed to foster community, stability, and upward mobility. And once again in its early years, the Estrada Courts, they served this purpose. Families moved in seeking safety, stability, and opportunity in a city where affordable housing for Latinos was scarce. Many residents were employed in local factories, warehouses, and service industries. The project was also culturally vibrant, with families creating tight-knit communities and children playing in the open courtyard, while murals began to reflect the rich Chicano heritage of the neighborhood. But as the decades wore on, Estrada Courts faced the same challenges that plagued the other housing projects in Los Angeles. By the 1960s and 70s, economic disinvestment, overcrowding, and a lack of city support turned the city into a hotbed of poverty. With limited opportunities and rising tension between youth gangs, Estrada Courts became increasingly associated with crime and violence. And by the late 1970s and 80s, Estrada Courts had become a stronghold for some of the most violent gangs in Los Angeles. And while the violence has definitely slowed down in this area, it's still violent run-ins seen to this day. On March 26, 2014, Ashley Corona and Gerardo Becerra went to Avela's home in Boyle Heights. Avela and Becerra were drinking beer and talking while Corona listened. This conversation was followed by Avela suggesting that they go outside. But before leaving the house, Avela grabbed the AK-47 assault rifle and said he was going to patrol his hood. The three then went outside, and Avela and Becerra continued talking while Corona sat on the ground. And at one point, Corona said something that made Avela angry. So he approached Corona, holding a gun to his right hand. And as they were arguing, he shot her on the leg. Avela then said to Becerra, "You're next, little bitch." Avela then returned to the house, and Becerra carried Corona across the street and set her down in the backseat of Avela's car. Avela then got into the car and apologized to Corona for shooting her and drove to the hospital. When they arrived at the entrance of the emergency room, Becerra carried Corona out of the car into the hospital, and Avela drove away. The gunshot broke Corona's tibia, and she underwent surgery, followed by physical therapy. While Corona was in the hospital, she was contacted by police officers. Although initially uncooperative, she began to talk and identified Avela from a 6-pack photographic lineup as a person who shot her. She told police officers that on the night she was shot, she had been drinking alcohol and argued with Avela, who shot her and then apologized. Police couldn't find Avela that night, but on the evening of March 27 of 2014, at the beginning of their shift, Los Angeles Police Department officers Vasquez and Martinez were briefed on the shooting of Corona by Avela the previous day. Officer Vasquez was familiar with Avela from the other 20 contacts he had with them, and his capacity as an officer previously assigned for monitoring the criminal activity, Barrio Nubio Estrada, was operated in East Los Angeles from Boyle Heights to Montebello. At approximately 4:30 a.m. while they were on patrol, Officer Vasquez and Martinez drove by the Estrada Courts projects and saw Avela and his mother standing outside a parked vehicle, followed by the officers initiating a felony stop. They requested backup and exited the patrol car. Avela and his mother were standing behind a vehicle that was parked along the street. and Officer Martinez could only see Avila from the shoulders up. So they moved up to get a better line of sight. The officers then drew their weapons and commanded Avila to stop, show his hands, and step away from the vehicle. But Avila, he didn't comply. Instead, he attempted to open the door to the vehicle next to him. And after he failed to open the car door, he moved away from the vehicle towards Officer Martinez with his fist clenched. Avila's mother stepped in front of Avila and yelled to the officers to leave Avila alone. But the officers again commanded Avila to raise his hands. But once again, he didn't comply. Instead, Avila responded, "What the fuck you want, motherfuckers? What the fuck you want, motherfuckers?" While telling them, "Fuck off." The officers then ordered Avila's mother to step aside, but she didn't listen either. And as Officer Martinez began to holster her gun and engage the retention strap, Avila moved rapidly towards her. Avila's mother also moved towards the officer. And Officer Martinez backed away, holding her hand out in an attempt to hold the mother away. And in the midst of that, Avila stepped forward and launched over his mother, punching Officer Martinez in the temple with his right fist. Officer Martinez immediately fell to the ground, and her head struck the pavement and she lost consciousness. Officer Vasquez testified that when his partner hit the ground, he holstered his weapon, followed by Avila jumping on Officer Vasquez and starting to punch the officer. Officer Vasquez then grabbed Avila by his torso, wrestled Avila to the ground, and straddled Avila. Meanwhile, Avila's mother grabbed Officer Vasquez from the back and tried to pull him off her son. He then pushed the mother away as he turned back around to continue his fight to subdue Avila. All this was happening as the officer was commanding Avila to stop. But Avila replied, "Fuck you, Vasquez. You can't stop V&E." In the midst of that, Officer Martinez got up from the ground but was stumbling and disoriented. As she regained her composure, she saw Avila and Officer Vasquez engaged in a full fight. Officer Martinez testified that Avila and Officer Vasquez were throwing punches at each other, and Avila's mother was standing directly behind Officer Vasquez, trying to pull him off of Avila. The officer also testified that she told Officer Martinez several times to make another call for backup because Officer Martinez didn't understand or realize where she was. She claimed she didn't know how long she was unconscious, but after seeing Avila and Officer Vasquez fight on the ground, she used her walkie-talkie to call for backup. She then pulled Avila's mother away from the officer and told the mother to stay back. Officer Vasquez testified that he was unsure whether Officer Martinez called for backup, so he removed his walkie-talkie and radioed for help. Saying he felt Avila reach for his gun, so he struck him several times in the face with his walkie-talkie. Officer Vasquez testified that he was unsure whether Martinez called for backup, so he removed his walkie-talkie and radioed for help. He then felt Avila reach for his gun, so he struck him several times in the face with his walkie-talkie. Officer Martinez also testified that she saw Avila's hand on Officer Vasquez's gun, and she could not ascertain whether the holster was undone or whether the safety on the gun was in place, stating that she was afraid that Avila was going to kill her partner and her, saying she therefore kicked him in the face and the head, hit him with her walkie-talkie, and used the collapsible baton or bully stick to hit Avila's leg. This altercation, it only ended after the backup officers arrived and took Avila into custody, and eventually he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Thankfully, nobody was killed in this situation, but trust, there's more than a few other situations involving the V&Es and the Estrada Courts housing project. But despite its notoriety, Estrada Courts has also become a hub for cultural expression. Its murals, painted by local artists and residents, tell stories of struggle, resilience, and Chicano pride. Reminders that the community has always fought to preserve identity and history, even amidst systematic neglect. Today, Estrada Courts, just like most other projects in Los Angeles, remain a symbol of the dual legacy of Los Angeles public housing. Built with hope and opportunity, abandoned by disinvestment, and transformed into a crucible for gang formation and survival. Its story, it reflects not only the rise of California's most notorious gangs, but also the resilience of families who have called Estrada Courts home for generations. Conclusion. Across Los Angeles, from the streets of Watts to Boyle Heights, Compton, and in San Fernando Valley, public housing projects tell the same story. Pueblo Del Rio, Nickerson Gardens, Jordan Downs, Imperial Courts, San Fernando Gardens, Ramona Gardens, Vista Gardens, Gonzag Village, Avalon Gardens, and Estrada Courts. Each built with hope, designed for working class families who were shut out of the city suburbs. Courtyards for children, walkways for neighborhoods, and a promise of community. But hope faded. Jobs disappeared, factories closed, city support vanished. Poverty and neglect became a new foundation. And where opportunity was absent, gangs rose. Bloods, Crips, Insurrectos have carved territories, claimed streets, and defined generations. Shootouts, set-up murders, turf wars, and crack epidemics turned these once hopeful developments into symbols of survival and fear. Their notoriety isn't about crime. It's about abandoned promise, systematic neglect, and the cycles of poverty that shaped their walls. These projects, they became living testimonies of the struggles of communities left behind. And yet, within them, families raised children, morals told stories, and culture thrived in the defiance of circumstance. Today, many of these projects have been rebuilt. Some walls have been repainted, streets have been cleaned, but their legacy endures. These apartments are more than buildings. They're crucibles for Los Angeles history, places where resilience and infamy exist, side by side, where generations fought to survive, and doing so left a big mark on the city itself. This is the story of LA's projects, born of hope, defined by struggle, and remembered by both their violence and their community. I'll say stay for dangerous out there.